Good day, YouTube. Today I want to talk about the jobs that I had in the Air Force, and I'll give you a brief description of what I did. I came in as a firefighter, so I did that for 4 years. I really enjoyed it, and I got to meet a lot of great people. In fact, when I was a firefighter, our schedule was 24 on, 24 off, and I made the closest relationships with people when I was part of the civil engineering squadron. Even my wife says that. When I retrained and did other jobs, we were still close as a unit, as a team, but she remembers, and so do I, civil engineering squadron, which is where the fire department falls under. That was the closest people that we had as a group on and off shifts. So I did that, like I said, for 4 years. I enjoyed it. I got my associate's degree in fire science through the Community College of the Air Force. And then I retrained into personnel. If you know my story, you've probably heard that before. Personnel was a better fit for me because I love to interact with people. And I was indoors, and it was a traditional work schedule, Monday through Friday. Every evening I would be at home. On weekends I would be at home. The exception was during 9/11. When 9/11 hit, we had to work around the clock. And that was new for me, but that's what the job was. My job at that time in personnel, I worked at the Personnel Readiness Unit, PRU, which at the time was deploying people. My office, where I worked, and I was a technical expert after being trained, was to deploy people, send them on their way, make sure that they were qualified medically, with all of the training that they needed to, with all of the equipment that they had to take with them, and then bring them back eventually. Not literally fly them back, but make their orders and educate them on what to do on the process. So that was my second job in personnel in the Air Force, was deploying people. Then I got out and I went through ROTC, and I eventually came back into the Air Force again as a personnel officer. My first job, I was a squadron section commander, which was a great job because I worked directly for the commander and I worked alongside the first sergeant. The first sergeant, he or she, are going to be your guidance. Because as a squadron section commander, what I did is I took care of morale issues, but I also had discipline up to a certain pay grade on the enlisted side. So when people got in trouble, they had to come to and see me, report. That's where that first sergeant would prep them and say, you're gonna knock on the door once, you're gonna go in, you're gonna salute, and you're gonna wait till the lieutenant tells you to sit down, stand at attention, stand at ease. And that was a very learning process for me, especially when you're an officer, because you have that discipline that you have to take care of. But that first sergeant was my right-hand person, and he was solid. So I would tell the individual, stand at ease, and I'd have to read a letter that the first sergeant had typed up on what the occasion was that the person usually got in trouble. And I'd have to read that, and then I'd put them at ease. And after I'd read that, I would have a conversation with them, because I always remember these are human people just like me. We're all people, period, regardless of rank. So I wanted to see if I could kind of like catch their attention, but let them know that if whatever they did wasn't that big of a deal or that serious, and their career could still continue, for them to get back on track. That was my third job in the Air Force. The next job, as an officer, I went right back to the readiness section. And at that point, I was managing and leading that section. The readiness section was, again, deploying people. So I could do that job. I knew it as an expert from my enlisted days. And then I did it leading the team. That was a very good job. My responsibility, an additional responsibility for deployment, was something called PERSCO, Personnel Support for Contingency Operations. And I was the PERSCO team chief. What that is when you deploy as a personnel, you're part of the PERSCO team. You are in charge of a few things, but first and foremost is accountability. You have to know who's on your base, who's coming, who's going, and you also have to work with, whenever there's an injury or a casualty, that you have to get a replacement by reaching back to the US and saying, I need this base to send this type of person with these skills. So I did that. Then I moved to Hawaii, to Hickam Air Force Base, and the job that I got was Squadron Section Commander again. So this time I worked with another first sergeant, and it was a lot busier. It was a bigger unit. I worked at the 735th Air Mobility Squadron, which was at the passenger terminal on Hickam Air Force Base. My office was on the second floor. I'd watch people get stuck every week. When I say stuck, is they were taking hops, you know, those free flights that people can sign up for. But if you're a retiree and you're trying to get a free flight, you're going to be at the bottom of the list. So every week I would see people there for 2 or 3 days. Sometimes it works for you. Sometimes it's better just to buy your ticket. So I did that job. Great job again. That second first sergeant that I worked with, he's now retired. He's a friend of mine. And I learned so much from that first sergeant on the job. As the years went by, this is at about the 10-year mark, my confidence and expertise really went up because I asked a lot of the right questions. I learned, I adapted, which is what I talk about on this channel. Then I went into the Air Force Reserve because I left active duty at about the 10-year mark. And my job, again, was working alongside readiness, deploying people. So that was the third time I did that. That was a good job. But then I did that for 2 years and I said, you know what, I want to teach or facilitate. And what I did is I would teach PERSCO. Remember that word that I used, Personnel Support for Contingency Operations. As a reservist, I did that for a few years. It was my job to get people trained, to teach them, and answer any questions. And I could do that with my eyes closed because I really enjoyed that. From there, I went to probably one of my most favorite jobs that I wanted, and that was equal opportunity. I did that for 3 years, and I went to the technical training at Patrick Air Force Base in Florida. It was 3 months long. It was total force. Usually that's in the Air Force. What I mean by total force, it was Army, Navy, Coast Guard, Marines, Air Force, all branches. We were students, and we learned how to do the job. And then I went back to my base with knowledge on equal opportunity training, team building. So when I give a brief, even today, I don't say he as the commander. I say he or she because I've been trained. Yes, there are female commanders. Not all commanders are males. Equal opportunity was a great job that I did for 3 years. And I'm very happy that I got that training. I also am a mediator, Department of Defense mediator, so I can mediate among individuals today that are having problems, whether it's supervisor and employee or teammates that work together that are having conflicts. So I can mediate between them and come to an agreement. I've also done things on the side, bystander intervention training. I took that training and I taught that for 2 years. And currently I am a resiliency trainer. So I do things on the side as well that the Air Force trained me to do. After equal opportunity, I went to the Force Support Squadron on the services side. The job really wasn't challenging for me, but I worked with a group of people that were probably the most hardworking people on the services side of the Air Force. Services, they're in charge of lodging, the dining facility, the fitness center, and other jobs as well. But those people were the hardest workers, and I have so much respect for the team. We went to England, and they were out there just working for the entire shift, and I felt like I needed to go out there and mop or cook or do whatever I needed to do because I wanted to be a part of that as well. And then my last job in the Air Force was leading a team of total force contractors, active duty, reserve and guard, and civil service. I supervised a team of 11 people over computer systems. Not my area of expertise, but the team that I worked with were solid. I learned a lot from them. I depended on them a lot, and we got the job done. Total, I know I've said a few times, 22 years of service. Technically, it was 21 years, 6 months that I served, and it went by quick. Of course, I've been an Air Force civilian for a few years as well. I was a financial counselor, which for 6 years, and I loved that. And currently my job is managing and leading the Transition Assistance Program at Peterson Air Force Base. I transitioned a year ago from the military. I went through that program and I inherited a great program. My goal is to continue that and make it even better over the years. Whatever job you're in, there's going to be times that you enjoy, times that you don't enjoy it, things that you'll like, things that you won't like, just like any other job. But my outlook has always been to first of all, make the job as fun as possible. But even before that is to know the job inside and out. When you know your job, you're going to feel better, because when you don't know your job, just like my last job over computer systems, it's not a good feeling. So that's like I depended on the team to teach me on this and that's what they did. That's my overview of the jobs that I had in the Air Force: enlisted, officer, civilian, active duty, and reserve. Hope you've enjoyed it. Take care.